Morning, everyone. My name is Declan. This is Usaama. We are the guys standing between you and a coffee break, so apologies for that. But I promise this will be a hugely inspirational 10 minutes and maybe easier to understand than the previous panel on AI. You will recall last night, Yves Leterme was talking about the gap between the type of democracy that's on offer at the moment and the type of democracy that citizens are looking for. He's absolutely right. There is a gap. And it's not just about the type of democracy, it's about the type of leadership, right? There is huge frustration these days with the caliber and type of leadership that we are seeing from elected officials. And we see it across the board, right? We see it in the inability to deal with the big problems like climate change, social inequalities. We see it in the jump from one crisis to the next crisis with no sort of long-term planning. And it's also, if you were at the lunch yesterday, you'll know that it isn't just a sort of national political phenomenon, but you're also seeing it at the multinational level, right? With the inability to deal with crises like Ukraine and Gaza and others. And this, for us, is something of incredible importance. We had the honor of working for someone who really embodied the notions of ethical, principled leadership. And if you saw the panel yesterday by Apolitical and the Hall of Fame, you'll know that it's very central to their work as well, right? So we've come together to launch a new initiative called the Leadership and Excellence in Politics, and it really aims to sort of fill that gap between citizens' expectations and what we're actually seeing from leaders. There's two elements to it. The first is very academic. We've convened a research council of political scientists and social scientists. It's going to be launched next week. And they're going to look at some of this very much from a research angle. You know, what are the skills? What are the competencies? What do we want to see in leaders? Are there standards we can set? Are there steps we can take to make sure there's sort of basic levels of competence? Confucius last night seemed to suggest that exams might have something to do with it. I'm not so sure, but we'll look into it and let you know. But the other element is a training for young people who are engaged in politics. You know, young political leaders who've stepped up. We bring them to Geneva every year. We run a program with GCSP, Nexus Vesting, and Apolitical, and it affords them the opportunity to understand more about the skills of leadership, develop those, learn from each other. And because we do it in Geneva, which is, you know, one of the multilateral headquarters, we have access to all of the UN institutions, and we can talk about that link between leadership at a national level and leadership at the multinational level. And we have one of the participants in that program here with us today. He is the councillor for Cricket Green in London, which is about the most English-sounding place I've ever come across. And he's exactly that profile of a young person who wanted to step up and take responsibility for delivering positive change in his community. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about that journey and the training he went through and how that's going to help him further down the path.
Okay. Thank you very much, Declan, for that very warm introduction. And good morning, everyone. And kalimera to our Greek speakers in the room. I want to start by saying how much of an honor it is to be back in this historic city and to be speaking before you at the Athens Democracy Forum. Athens is a place that has a special significance for me. Because I first came here a few years ago, and this was in the middle of what some were calling the refugee crisis in Europe. I was a lot younger back then, younger than I look today, whether you believe that or not. I was very idealistic and ready to make a difference in the lives of young unaccompanied children who were arriving here. To me, these were children who were simply seeking safety, children who were seeking a place where they could feel secure. And I really connected with these young people. While I didn't come to the UK as a refugee, I did move to the UK with my family at a very young age in search of a better life. And I can honestly say it's an experience that stays with you and it shapes how you see the world, and it certainly shaped how I see leadership as well. And the reason I bring this up is because when I look back at my own leadership journey, I see how personal my journey's been, and I see how my story has always guided me along the way. How I've always tried to lead with the values that I grew up with. These are values like empathy, compassion, and a commitment to standing up to those who felt voiceless. And these values have been my personal compass, and they're the foundation of the message that I want to share with all of you this morning. It's also why my experience on the Leadership Excellence in Politics program has meant so much to me. It's helped me refine what values-driven leadership looks like in practice, and it reaffirmed to me why it is that I do what I do. And throughout the program, I had the chance to learn from leaders and from mentors and fellow peers who were just as passionate about making politics more inclusive and more ethical as I was. But before I delve a bit deeper into what exactly I gained from that program, just to share a little bit more about my journey. Growing up, I always had a strong sense that politics should be for everyone, especially when the reality around me proved that it wasn't. I grew up in a community in London, in southwest London to be precise, the best part of London, where a lot of my neighbours and friends and myself at a time felt like decisions were made quite far away, and where our voices didn't always really matter. And what made things worse is that those people who were on the margins, they were the ones who were most affected by political decisions, and they were the ones who sadly were not being heard. And so for me, becoming an elected councillor wasn't about seeking a particular position or about a fancy title. Not that being a councillor is all that fancy anyway, but for me it was about making sure that those people who felt furthest away from the rooms of power, that they had a seat at the table. I wanted to make sure that their stories and their struggles were not just being heard, but it actually influenced the decisions that were being made, even at a local level. This was especially true when it came to young people. We've heard from a lot of young people throughout this forum, and I absolutely empathize with the challenges that they face, because giving young people a voice has always been something that's quite close to my heart. And so I wanted to make sure that our youngest citizens, who, of course, in some situations are the most vulnerable, were part of shaping their own future. And that's been a driving force for me, especially in my part of London. And so I've worked to create systems where children and young people, particularly those who have faced incredible challenges, can influence the decisions that directly affect them. But I have to be honest, this kind of leadership isn't easy. And the reason it isn't easy, as we all know, is because it's not the norm. And that's why LEAP came at such an important time. It gave me the tools and the community that I needed to stay true to my values, even at a time when it wasn't easy. And it's precisely because of this challenge that one of the moments that really stood out for me during the LEAP program was learning from Dr. Gervias Rifakiri. And just to share a bit about his story. So he was the former vice president of Burundi. And he was someone who was in a position of incredible power. And when he was faced with a choice between his principles and power, he chose to stand by his values, even though it meant that he would have to go into exile because he was standing up against a president who was in violation of the country's democratic constitution. And listening to his story was a reminder that leadership isn't about holding on to power or a particular position. It's about standing up for your beliefs, even if it may cost you everything. And that's the kind of leadership that I feel we need more of today. Now, fortunately, I haven't had to face any challenges as tough as Dr. Rafakiri, but I have had moments where I've had to stand my ground, especially when fighting for inclusion in my part of London. And it's not always easy to push back when there's pressure to compromise. But what LEAP reinforced for me is that leadership has to be rooted in values. And when we lead with those values, we can rebuild trust with those people who really rely on our leadership. And I see that a lot at a local level. And another important lesson I took away from LEAP is the importance of inclusion. As I said earlier, I've always believed that politics should be accessible to everyone. But the program made me realize just how important this is, especially with the rise of AI, as we were just hearing earlier, and with misinformation as well. And people feel disconnected from political processes, and that's really dangerous in this day and time. I see it in my community in Merton, where citizens on the margins of our society feel like even if they get involved, their voice doesn't matter and it doesn't make a difference. But LEAP helped me see that this isn't just a local issue. It's something that we're facing across the world. And as leaders, it's our job to change that. We have to bring people in and make sure that not only do they feel heard, but their concerns are taken up and feed into the policies that we implement locally. And since LEAP, I've been even more determined at a local level to make sure that all of my residents have a seat at the table. And just to give one example, I've been working closely with children and young people who are in the government's care, who for whatever reason couldn't live with their parents. And these are often the most vulnerable children in our society. And I've ensured that these young people aren't just consulted, but that they've directly been involved in shaping the services that affect them. It has been challenging. It's not easy work, but inclusion isn't something that should be easy. But it's something that needs to be done if we want to improve a relationship between leaders and the people that they lead. And I'm just going to wrap up in a moment. And that's why I strongly believe that this is what values-led leadership looks like in practice. And my last thought is just looking ahead, I actually do feel quite hopeful about the future. And it's because through LEAP, I saw that I'm not alone in addressing this challenge. There's a community of young leaders and leaders of all ages who are striving to improve that connection between their institutions and the people that they lead. And before I close, I just want to say a huge thank you to the Kofi Annan Foundation, to the Apolitical Foundation, and to the Geneva Centre for Security Policy for supporting me along this journey. And thank you very much for listening to my speech. And I hope that you're able to take something away from it. Thank you very much.
Can I just say, we know we're not alone working on this issue. There's lots of you here who are. We're here. Apolitical is here. Come and find us. Let's talk. I know there's more we can do together. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.